Well, hi, welcome to episode 22 of Lean Whiskey. I'm Mark Graban, and if you are watching on YouTube, you'll notice that we have two guests with us here today. For those of you who are listening, I'll get right into introductions. So I'm really happy to be joined. They're both with a firm called Honsha Consulting. We're joined by Darryl Wilburn and Sammy Obara. How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Doing well so far.
And tell us where you're joining us from, Darryl, first.
I'm in San Antonio, Texas, where I actually met Mark many years ago. Mm-hmm. So Mark was a former resident of San Antonio.
Yep, that is true. We'll talk about that more in a second. And Sammy, you are in
San Diego, sunny San Diego, where I've been living here for the past 7-8 years now.
Yeah. Good place to be. Just down the coast from where I am now in LA. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I actually, so we always talk about when we have guests on here, where did we meet? And I actually met Sammy first, I believe, through Lean Enterprise Institute connections. I was offered an opportunity to sit in on a workshop that you taught. It must have been 2009 or so, around then. Do you?
I don't remember which workshop or where it was. And I'm bad with faces. Now I can recognize you really well. But back then, do you remember what it was?
I should have thought about this in advance. That's a question I should have prepared for. It'll come back to me maybe after a couple of sips of whiskey. I can vaguely picture it was, when we did workshops in a room, and I know that doesn't really help, but were you doing a workshop on problem solving?
Back in 2009, we were doing one every month almost, or 3 every month. So, yeah, only I had an intense portfolio of classes and places. So it was all over the US and Canada.
Yeah. And then Darryl, yeah, you're right. We met up. We had lunch in San Antonio. I remember that well.
Yes.
I think that was our first opportunity to cross paths. And I think I might have reached out to you because maybe we'd done a podcast about Toyota by Toyota.
Could have been. Yeah, I think that's what it was. I brought you a copy of the book. So yeah, remember that.
I don't think. Did we not do a lean podcast about the book?
I don't know.
I don't think we did. So I am. I don't.
That could be next.
I don't know why that didn't happen. Yeah, we can do that next. But I am Mr. Unprepared today.
But I have to give you a pro tip. Whenever you're talking to somebody about when we met and you can't remember, you just say, "Don't you remember we met in prison?" And that makes it a nice conversation starter for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, different pro tip. I've gotten burned before when you meet people at conferences, and then you get introduced to someone, and you say, "Nice to meet you," and they say, "Oh, well, we met 2 years ago."
Yeah, don't you remember?
Oh, and then sometimes people are nice and like, "Oh, well, you probably meet a lot of people." I'm like, "Yeah, I still feel bad." So I've learned to say like, "Good to see you," or something that's more generic, maybe less likely to get in trouble. But
good idea.
But I mentioned the book, and I don't have a copy of it with me here. I've got a copy of it in Texas. I love the book Toyota by Toyota. You've got one over your shoulder. I talk up this book as much as I can because it's a great collection. Maybe I'll let you tell everyone about a collection of perspectives from different Toyota folks.
Yeah, we wrote that book several years ago, and kind of our premise was we wanted to express to people our reflections of working at Toyota and how that impacts how we teach and interact with people out in the world. We actually wanted to name the book something around reflection or something like that. And the publisher, we were kind of new to the business, and the publisher really pressured us to say, "No, let's call it Toyota by Toyota." And okay. And maybe they were afraid that if we didn't have the name in there twice, that it wouldn't come up on a Google search or something like that. I don't know.
Right.
So we learned a lot. One of the reasons we wrote the book was to learn how to write a book, and so we learned a lot with that. And we will do things differently in the future as we have other books come out. But it was a good learning process. But yeah, the book, like you said, a collection of different folks in Toyota and how they learned, and then how they try to teach. So we really think about it as our reflection.
And Sammy and Darryl, I know you both worked for Toyota. Do you recall when and where you first met or worked together?
It wasn't in Toyota. Darryl, I'm not sure if I remember that clearly, but it was in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, it was in 2008 in Salt Lake City. Sammy and I met through LEI contact as well, that I had met at Toyota before. And when I left Toyota to go out into the world, contacted them, and they kind of sent out a contact with all the folks in LEI and said, hey, introduced to Darryl. And then Sammy responded, and a few weeks later, he invited me to come kind of shadow him at a client in Salt Lake City. And I remember he called me and said, yeah, it's going to be a standardized workshop. If you'd like to do some of it. And then it changed, like, would you like to do it all? And it went from 24 people. Then he called me a few days later and said, there's going to be 50. And I'm like, oh my God, I've never done 50 people, and we have to go to the Gemba, and we have to. And I remember calling him in a panic saying, Sammy, I can't do this. And I thought, well, any career I may have had is already blown now because, and he said, oh, it's okay, come on. And so we ended up splitting it, and it was fine. But I remember vividly that experience, because I thought I made the biggest mistake in my life of leaving the corporate world, going out into the consulting world. And this is the expectation, to take 50 people on the floor. Oh, I must have made a mistake. But it worked out really well. And the rest is history, as they say.
Mm-hmm. It was. And I remember that in one of the days, I'm not sure how many hours it was, I was called to a meeting that had nothing to do with the agenda. And Darryl just took over. When I came back, people were already in love with him. So it was really amazing.
And Sammy, I want to maybe ask each of you just real quick, your time in Toyota, locations and where you each were. Maybe Sammy, if you can go first. Sure.
Well, I was hired as an intern for just a year, right after my technical college. It's actually technical high school in Brazil. They call it college, but it's high school. And so right after that 1 year, then I started the college, and then they sent me, right after I graduated, they sent me to Japan. So it was from when I was 17 years old for 13 years, living in Brazil, Toyota Brazil, and then in Toyota Japan, Toyota City for 3 years. Right after that, they sent me to Toyota Venezuela. There was no Toyota Venezuela at that time, but they wanted to start one. And they converted one factory, CKD, as they call it, a complete knockdown assembly company, into a Toyota factory. So I was there with a delegate group of another 9 TMC, Toyota Motor Corporation people, to start this new factory. And then right after that, went back to Toyota Brazil for another 2 years, and then I came to the US. So 25 years ago, I immigrated, finished some education here, and got my green card. Mm-hmm. And the rest is history, as Darryl says.
And Darryl, how about you?
Yeah, I started in Toyota, Kentucky. Interestingly enough, I had a career before. I was working in education. I worked at the University of Kentucky. And my oldest daughter's best friend in preschool, we met her parents and we became friends, and he worked at Toyota. And he said, hey, we have this position you might be interested in. It was a coaching and development position where they were trying to set up a system to help people be successful inside of Toyota, where executives and senior leaders were maybe really good technically, but needed some support on the people side. Mm-hmm. And so that was part of my background. And so I came in, and that was my first job. And I fell in love with the Toyota production system while I was there, and was really lucky enough to be able to study with OMDD. It's an Operations Management Development Division inside of Toyota, the internal keepers of the flame, in a sense, for TPS. And so I got a chance to learn at suppliers and on the floor in Toyota, Kentucky, really, I guess, at the Gemba kind of learning, the typical Toyota kind of teaching. And so I may have been the worst student that they ever had, but I think I probably learned more percentage-wise than anybody they ever had too, because I was starting at such a low level. So
maybe that makes you the best student then, Darryl.
I don't know. I guess it's depending on how you look at it: half full, half empty, or less than half full. I don't know. But from there, I had a chance to go to the North American headquarters, and so it was great working at the plant, but also wanted to kind of see more of North American plants. And so I got a chance to go to all the plants, including NUMMI and some of the others, and work there. One of my projects in the North American headquarters was a startup in San Antonio. And so I was supporting that 1 week a month. And I could tell that they were kind of hinting toward, why don't you come and join us full time and on the Texas team? And because the startup experience, as Sammy explained, starting in Venezuela, the startup experience is such an amazing opportunity. There's no way to say no.
Yeah.
Now, I knew I was going from what I really loved, traveling and seeing multiple places, back to one place. But it was just an amazing experience to see how Toyota goes from nothing. And we hadn't even broken ground when I came. Yeah. There were 70 people, 35 internal, 35 external people who formed that initial team. And just to go from that until 2.5 years later, we're producing vehicles at takt time at the end of the first day. Yeah. It's just amazing to see how that happens. And I think at that point I had an opportunity to join Honsha and go out into the consulting world, and I took that, and I've never looked back since then.
I was wondering if either of you had the opportunity to meet or work with or learn from Mr. Oba, who passed away recently, kind of legendary from Toyota circles.
Not me.
Not you.
Yeah, not directly. Mr. Oba started OMDD, so he was around NA some, but some of his students continued that tradition. He was back in Japan by the time I had a chance to be a student of theirs. But he's legendary, of course.
He sure is. So maybe let's toast. Let's toast to him real quickly, or yeah.
Obasan.
Obasan.
As he influenced, he's influenced many people, including, here in the U.S. I never had the chance to meet with him, but I've heard so much about him, secondhand, second degree connections. So we, this is lean whiskey, and we toasted, and so this is maybe the portion here where we'll talk about what are you drinking. Sometimes have a theme. The theme today is drink what you like. It is not standardized, and that's fine, right?
Yeah. Well, my drink of choice, I'm a Kentucky boy at heart, born and raised. And so there's only one type of whiskey, and that's bourbon whiskey from my perspective. Yeah. And so my drink of choice is the Woodford Reserve, a Double Oaked. It's a special occasion being on Mark's podcast. So little Double Oaked Woodford Reserve is my special occasion go-to drink. Yes,
I love Woodford Reserve, and especially that Double Oak. I have some of that in the bar here, and then we can tell by looking at it, you did something fun with it. You didn't just pour it into a glass.
Yeah, I did my special old-fashioned recipe, my favorite simple drink, with a little raw sugar instead of the regular sugar. The liquid raw sugar is the best. A smoked glass, kind of smoke a oak panel, put the glass on top and get it kind of smoky. 4 or 5 shots of bitters and a shot of old-fashioned or shot of whiskey, and also a little bit of water included as well.
Yeah. And then I should have asked you, it would be fun to get, that sounds like quite a process. We can get a video of that.
Yeah, yes, I should do that. My neighbor called me a couple of weeks ago or texted me, said, "Can you give me your old-fashioned recipe?" And And I said, sure. So I walked him through all the steps, but a nice explainer video would be even better, I think.
Because I've seen a bartender do that trick, professional bartender doing that with lighting something on fire enough to create the smoke and then trap it in the glass.
Yeah. It's that extra, especially if it's oak already. So you got maybe triple oaked now. This gives you that little extra whiff of oak as you're having your whiskey.
I mean, you could do that with the barrel stave that maybe has a little bourbon in the wood. Yeah,
you could do that. It'd be perfect. So, but I don't want to use this one because it's kind of extra special. So I'll get a generic one maybe.
Yeah, right. So maybe real quick, just a pause on what you're drinking. People in the video can see that Sammy and Darryl both have it's a round piece of wood with something on there. Is that a whiskey barrel head? What's going on?
Yeah, that's a whiskey barrel head. It was a gift from one of our friends last year for Christmas. So it's kind of nice. Sammy, you can tell them what's in the middle.
Yeah, that's the kanji for Honsha. It just shows Hon, and there's the brackets here, which is two hands just embracing the origin. Hon is origin, as you probably know. And it's the same kanji that Darryl and I have tattooed in our chests.
Yours is on your chest?
Yeah.
I got the wrong memo.
They played a prank on you when you were new.
Yeah.
It wasn't just to teach 50 people prank.
I can't even show mine on video.
Oh boy. So that's cool that you've got that barrel head behind you. Sammy, what are you drinking?
So we are not heavy drinkers here, but we use sake for cooking. But this is a very nice, great sake, and it's from Japan. We have a Japanese store not too far from here. So just drinking that on a sake glass.
Okay, yeah, very nice. I like sake. I am intimidated by sake because I don't know the terminology. So I try to rely on somebody who knows what they're doing to make a recommendation, whether that's a friend who's with me or let's say the restaurant.
Yeah. Some people say that you can drink cold or warm or hot. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems to be a little bit stronger, although it's the same thing, but it gets to your head a lot faster, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm doing the cold one today.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of process, like one of my favorite, if you will, rituals around drinking is when you have the sake served in the wooden box that's on a plate. And like the symbolism and everything that goes into like making sure you overfill it a little bit, and drinking from a square wooden vessel is kind of unusual. And then there's etiquette. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I remember correctly. You're not supposed to pour your own. You're supposed to pour for others, right?
Yes, and let them serve you. And when they do, you have to drink at least one sip just to demonstrate acceptance.
Yeah. So there are a lot of nice rituals around that, and kind of overfilling it probably represents abundance. It spills into a little plate, and whether you're supposed to or not, I'll drink what's in that plate too if it's good sake.
Yeah.
Probably not supposed to let it go to waste. I know sushi chef would say don't waste rice, and since sake is made from rice, maybe that applies.
Yes, it has a big symbology. They call it mottainai. Whenever you leave, when I was a kid, my mom, although we spoke Portuguese at home, this mottainai word is so strong from generations, and that means waste and disrespect. So if you have, and that's what I tell my kids too, they are 9 years old. If they leave 8-9 grains of rice in their plates, I still say, hey, mottainai.
Yeah.
Because it's disrespectful to the entire chain of planting and harvesting and transporting and washing and cooking and serving, and then along 2 meals a day over 360 days. So it's a full meal that you're just throwing out. But it's more of a symbology that we want everybody to be respectful to all the work that got into that 1 grain of rice.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I'm drinking is it's not going to show up well with the lighting. It's a Japanese whiskey, Ichiro's Malt and Grain whiskey. This is absolutely one of my favorite Japanese whiskeys. I managed to find a bottle here in California. There's another one that was really difficult to find. Ichiro's Malt whiskey that I purchased and brought home from Japan last time, and it was a shop where, they had a bottle. This was not the time when I was there with you, Darryl, but this was in I think it was actually in Osaka. There was like an underground liquor store in like the walkways, between the trains and the sort of underground shops and underground city. And I was walking by one day and it caught my eye. There are 3 different types of this Ichiro's malt, and I think they had 2 of the 3. And I stopped and I asked about the price, and I didn't have my passport with me, which maybe was bad practice on my part, but I couldn't get the tax-free price or whatever. I thought, okay, well, I'll get my passport. I'll come back tomorrow. I came back the next day. It had already sold. I'm like, oh, bad mistake. Save a little bit of money and then to not get it. But then the shopkeeper was really nice. He said, I think we're getting more in on Thursday. And so I came back on Thursday and he recognized me. And I don't think he had it like completely set aside reserved, but he had made that effort to help me get what I was looking for. And maybe there's a lesson to be learned there. If you see a rare whiskey, go ahead and buy it.
Do you have Japanese stores near your area there? Marina Del Rey, I think they have Marukai, no?
Yes. There are many sushi restaurants, and we're going to talk about sushi here in Japan, adventures that Darryl and I in our group had. But in particular, I love uni, and uni is easier to find here in Southern California than it is in Texas. So you've got Santa Barbara.
Like the Texas uni? Come on.
Off the Gulf Coast? No. You can get the Santa Barbara uni, but the Japanese uni, particularly the Hokkaido uni, is the best. And there's at least one restaurant that I've found and I've gone to that specializes in uni. You can have uni 20 different ways at this restaurant. So I'm in uni heaven down here. Different stories. So Darryl and I had cross paths. We had lunch. We had met. Cross paths at a conference, and then it was very kind of you. The invitation to go on one of the Honsha trips to Japan. That was just over 2 years ago. I think Facebook was reminding me,
yes,
of some of this, and such it's always a special opportunity, and to go and to learn from you and your Honsha colleagues was such a great experience. And one of the things I've heard you say at a conference, and then we talked about it again during the trip, not to make you blush, Darryl, but this is one of the favorite phrases that I've ever heard. And when it related to the Toyota production system or lean, and I think it just sums up so much of it. And I'm going to read off the way I jotted it down. And I've heard you say it, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to ask you to elaborate on it. It's the leader's responsibility to provide a system in which people can be successful. Hopefully I learned that. That was your intent. That was what you said.
Yeah, that's. I've said it different ways, but that's that captures the essence of it, I think. Yeah.
So, what is more of the essence of that? To kind of elaborate, there's a lot to pull apart in a single sentence, I think.
Yeah, I think it you could take it pretty deep and have lots of discussions around what that means and what it looks like in companies that have really good systems, and then what it looks like also in companies that don't, so you can kind of compare and contrast. And I think one of the things that folks who grew up at Toyota, from maybe it was their only job, and they stayed at Toyota for 30, 35 years, maybe they don't realize actually what they're working in, mm-hmm. and how special it is. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes they even go and become consultants, and they'll go out and try to implement, but it's so different in the world. There's no underlying systems and processes that support all the things we take for granted. And so since I joined Toyota after I'd already had some outside work experience, and then was able to go even after that and teach other people. I got a chance to kind of really experience the greatness of it as coming in a little bit later, and then be able to go out and contrast that with other organizations. So part of that is a really simple kind of look, and we talked about when we teach TPS and topics like that internally at Toyota, just a simple kind of waste, right? You have Muri, Mura, and Muda, and most people are very aware of Muda, the 7 waste. And I'm a purist. It's 7 waste. It's what we learned and what we teach. But there's also the other parts of waste too, the other 2 M's, and the Muri, the overburden, and the Mura, which is unevenness. Those are system level things. And so most, especially frontline team members, don't have a lot of impact on that. I guess it's arguable that they have no impact on those system level things. They work within that system. So if you're working in systems that have a lot of overburden of people and machines and processes, if you're working in systems that have a lot of unevenness, then you're really experiencing the impact of those bad systems and how they impact people, and also other parts of the business as well. And if we kind of take a few steps back and look at that, that's our responsibility as leaders to put that in place. And then when we don't, then it goes back to Sammy's comment around being respectful. That's a respectful thing, is to set people up to be successful. I think that's kind of a surface level description. We could, again, go deeper and deeper. But it's not just about the process. It's also about those systems and the thinking way and the vision setting that happens with leaders. Mm-hmm. And if there's a gap in that, it's usually the people who come in and have to do get the cars out every day, or get the patients out every day, or take care of the patient, or take care of customers that suffer from that. So we could have a whole podcast just on that probably, but that's kind of the high level.
We can do that again at some point, sure. Sammy, what are your thoughts and reflections around that concept of leaders' responsibility to provide a system?
One thing that caught my attention, Toyota was my first place of employment, and I always thought that was the normal way of doing things everywhere. And it was a big shock when I left Toyota, came to the US, and then I saw that, it's not even apparent. I think it's just accepted, that amount of waste. People don't know exactly what to do, what kind of standards to follow. When we say respect for people, I think that's mainly how can we respect their time doing work here? Maybe by creating the standards and ways for them to not fail would be the responsibilities of a leader. So, so I only learned things like, Toyota call it 4 S's. Here they call it 5 S's. I only learned the purpose of that after I came to the US. After 13 years in Toyota, I never knew what that was for. But when I came here the first day, I said, wow, how can you even function in an environment where you don't know anything? So then it hit me. Oh, that's why Toyota uses 4 S's.
At some point it was 3S, and we often talk about 5S, and
10S,
talked about
15S,
7 wastes instead of 8, and then people propose a 9th. And I don't like saying 6S, because I think safety is more of a precondition. The word starts with S, but so does sushi and security.
I thought it was smile. I thought the 6S was smile. I missed that one. That's one of our kind of running jokes, is that we look for all the S's that people, and the spirit is good. They're in the spirit of Kaizen. They want to make a 3S and 4S and 5S better. So they say, let's add another S. Maybe that will be the way it's better. Yeah. But maybe not.
Yeah. That phrase, we talk about a leader's responsibility to provide a system. That is very different than many healthcare settings, unfortunately, where I hear leaders blaming frontline medical professionals, and they'll use language like, well, we're going to hold them accountable. And to me, that seems unfair, and I would even say disrespectful of, quote unquote, let's just say blaming somebody for a bad result that's driven by the system, lack of error proofing, overburden, lack of standard work, silos, and poor communication across those silos. Those are all systemic factors. And so I end up trying to repeat that phrase and sharing it in a way, hopefully that inspires leaders to think about that sense of responsibility, because it kind of flips things 180, and that, it's not like flipping a light switch where people say, oh, right, yeah, it is my responsibility.
Right. And I think that word you mentioned, accountability, is kind of a red flag word for me. I always listen a little bit more when people say that, because I want to really understand what they mean.
Right.
Sometimes it just means I want to blame, right? I don't want to take responsibility. And so this is kind of a Hoshin season right now. I'm working with some organizations on with their Hoshin right now, and this comes up because once we start really figuring out what are the top breakthrough items you're going to do, we start to break that down into what we're going to do to execute on that, and how we're going to measure. And that word comes up a lot with leadership teams is, oh yes, we need to hold the managers accountable. So, well, let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. Mm-hmm. And accountability is a part of a process as well. It's not the first thing. The first thing is really understanding what we're trying to accomplish and sharing that with everybody, so we're crystal clear on exactly what we're trying to do. And we've also translated that down through the organization so that people understand what this high-level goal means to them and what they're doing. So we kind of perform the faithful translator concept all the way through the organization. And once we do that, have we clarified the guidelines of how we're going to accomplish it. What is our value system? What is the right way and the wrong way to do things? What are the regulations and rules and laws and things that are applicable here? Have we really done a good job of helping people understand that? Have we given people resources, good systems, good training, whether it be computers or whatever tools that they need to be successful? Then we can hold people accountable. But if we haven't done those things, we can't just say, I blame you. Right. We have to make sure we have done those things. And then the last part of that is, what are the consequences? Mm-hmm. And that's not a bad word. That's just what naturally happens if we're successful at doing what we said we're going to do as an individual or as a team. And what happens if we're less than successful? What happens after that? So I love that. I love it when I hear that, because it really sparks a lot of good conversations with people, so they understand their role. They can't just say you're accountable. They have to also set that system up before that, so that we can hold people accountable. And people want that, but they want to be set up for success and then be held accountable, not just pointed in any direction and say, I blame you if it's not what was in my mind. Yeah. So I want to just build off of that and jump into a story that we can look back on and laugh about. When we were part of the trip in Japan, Darryl. So I'm going to tell the story from my perspective, then I'm going to ask you to sort of fill in some details or what you recall from your perspective. But we had the bus in our group, that large group of 25 people. We pull up to a fairly large sushi restaurant. And we all come in and we're seated at different tables, and it's conveyor belt sushi, which I think is really cool because I've done that before. They have that, in London, and they have it here in the US now. And I had done conveyor belt sushi on different trips to Japan. So I thought I knew how it worked. And this is the mistake, right? I thought I knew how it worked. And then this is where my mistake comes in. And we can talk about whether I should have been blamed or held accountable or what happened. So, the conveyor belt sushi, you've got plates coming around. And my understanding of conveyor belt sushi was that if you see something that looks good to you, you grab it. And then, they charge you for the different plates that you take. Now, I've been to places where there was a separate special order flow, where if you put in a special order, it would come on a track directly to your table.
to kind of help make clear, like, well, this one was prepared especially for you in response to your order. So here we were, and we were grabbing plates off of the conveyor belt. And then at some point, it was somehow made clear to us that we were creating chaos. Because at this conveyor belt sushi restaurant, there were regular plates, and then there were plates on red pedestals. And I had mistakenly assumed that a plate on a red pedestal was maybe more expensive. It turns out, no, those were the special orders. We were grabbing people's special orders, which was rude, and I was really embarrassed, inadvertently, done, messing up other people's lunch, messing up the flow for the restaurant. Then Darryl, we put you in a situation to sort of try to help clean up this mess a little bit, right? What was the story from your perspective?
Well, so one of my favorite things is to take the Japan trip, and I'm really saddened at this time of the year because usually I do one in May and October, and we haven't been able to do either this year with COVID.
Yeah.
I really love to take the group to one of the conveyor belt sushi places, just because the quality is outstanding for that kind of restaurant. It's hard to believe, but they're all a little different. And so this particular one we went into, I think, was really exceptionally good. But they didn't have as much English direction, and some of the visual management wasn't quite as self apparent, I guess, as we may have been used to in some other ones. So I think from a leadership perspective of kind of leading that tour, we failed to put you guys in a really good process, and so we learned a lot from that. What we have done since then is to have more instruction and some more visuals when we go into one of the restaurants, because we want to put you guys in a better process when you're going through, so you can be successful and not leave such a bad reputation. We're never allowed to go back to that sushi restaurant ever again. Just a joke. No,
okay, good.
Just kidding.
Good.
Just kidding. I'm sure it's not the first time that it happened. But that's a good point, though. And we on that trip, we constantly look for teaching opportunities about process. And so our goal is always, to have it be seamless for the participants, for everything from 6 a.m. until midnight, whatever you end, that it's a seamless experience. Yeah. And anytime it's not, then we should really look and reflect on what we can do better. And so we have definitely reflected on that process and others that we do on the trip as well, to make it as seamless and put people in really good processes so they can be successful. You may remember on the trip, we have a little, attendance, because the trip has become, there's so many people. Usually we want to not just count to see how many people are on the bus, but we have a little sliding thing. When you get on the bus, you slide it over to your end, right?
Yep, I remember that.
And sometimes, we'll have a person or two who doesn't do that. And I know it probably looks like a shtick or something that I do, but I'll go back to the person and apologize to them. I'm sorry. I didn't do a good enough job in developing this system to help you be successful. Yeah. And I am serious. If it was better, it would be error proof, right?
You would say, I forgot to do it, right? So how could we make it possible to not forget?
Right. So nobody wants to do a bad job. Everybody wants to do the best job, but I've got to put them in a really good position. So we learned that in the sushi restaurant. We learned it in lots of other ways. So not just the tours we go on in Japan, it's also those learning opportunities like that. They're priceless.
And the least surprising thing I've heard all week is that you learned from that and you've made improvements. So
yes, of course. Yeah, it was pretty traumatic for everybody.
Well, I was mortified, embarrassed. I felt like I brought great shame.
And what about the hungry people at the end of the line who didn't get any food that day? I feel bad for them too.
Well, it's just, I feel bad. I don't want people to think in the future like, oh no, here comes a group of foreigners and they're going to screw up our lunch. Hopefully nobody had too bad of a perception of us, but part of the joy and the challenge of doing the Japan trips is getting out of your comfort zone and learning not just about a different culture and a different way of life, and doing your best to fit in, and not not being the tall blade of grass that sticks out, but it's unavoidable when you're a foreigner. I mean, I think on other trips, I think that was my 4th time to Japan. So maybe I'd learned enough, like I was overconfident in my ability to navigate the conveyor belt sushi. I remember in previous trips being told that, well, if you can follow the rules, that's great, but they'll cut you some slack because you're probably apparently, to me, or to, not,
well,
okay,
we talk
well,
about
clearly you're not
the 10
Japanese.
times rule. It's a 10 times rule.
Say that again. What is that?
And it's like a 10 times rule. And part of that 10 times rule is that they will forgive you if you're not doing anything, on purpose. So you have 10 times forgiveness in some things, and then 10 times more attention in other conditions. But in that one, I think we're safe.
No, on that trip, Dan Markovitz, our friend and fellow author who was part of the group, you had invited him as well. He was out for an early morning run, because of jet lag, and he's a runner. And it was probably 4:30 in the morning, and he jaywalked. And that's the first thing you observe in Japan, is that people do not jaywalk; they do not cross against the light. And Dan apparently had done that, and a police car rolled by and yelled at him over the PA. And for one, it was in Japanese, and maybe it was dark and they couldn't tell that Dan, he does speak Japanese, but if they had gotten a good look at him, they wouldn't have assumed that. But I remember what Dan said. They sort of, kind of over the loudspeaker said basically, that's unsafe, which is different than you think police might yell, don't do that, or just that's against the law. I thought it was interesting that that's what they yelled at him, and he actually understood it. Me, I would thought, I was just threatened with arrest.
Well, that's a good point. It went to the purpose of that rule. The purpose is to be safe,
Right.
not to punish you, but it's to be safe. And it was a nice reminder, I'm sure, for Dan.
He got some coaching. On that. Sammy, I mean, you said you got to live and work in Japan. Did you have any sort of moments of trying to fit in and how to get along there?
No, but when you're talking about this, they call it kuru sushi, the one conveyor belt, it brought me a good memory. The first time I went there, in Toyota City, they had one that was totally automated, with even the sushi was done by a little robot. Wow. That made the little squares. And I didn't know that, well, it was the first time in Japan, to start with. So I didn't even know that they counted the number of plates and the colors, and they would charge you by the number. And so I would be eating the sushi and putting the plates back to the conveyor belt. So that's even worse, because it looks like you're trying to avoid, a big bill at the end.
Right.
But I also look Japanese, so it's double worse. Because it just, didn't, but it wasn't on purpose. But then when you were with a group of other Japanese people or Japanese looking people, it's not as forgiving as if you're a real foreigner.
Yeah.
But I have.
No, one of our friends, Sammy and I's friends, he's also Japanese Brazilian. Mm-hmm. And we were in Japan several years ago, and he asked for directions and didn't speak Spanish. I mean, didn't speak Japanese. He spoke Portuguese. And the lady looked at him with disgust, like, what? You don't speak Japanese? Yeah. So, it's a 10 times rule the opposite way sometimes.
Yeah. It's a good lesson in assumptions and misunderstandings that come out of that. With Dan, or like I was when I was in Japan maybe 5 or 6 years ago, a college buddy of mine had ended up studying Japanese literature and Japanese language in Japan. He was on sabbatical. And so he was back in Japan researching and studying. And so I got to go hang out with him. And he looks like kind of like a shorter Conan O'Brien. He's got, big red hair. And so, they both have stories on, kind of like inadvertently overhearing things because people assume they don't speak Japanese. And, my friend Kendall is very fluent, and Dan would claim he's not very fluent, but I think he understands a lot. So creates, you could probably do a whole, it's like sitcom moments of the misunderstandings and miscommunications that come from bad assumptions. And that's a bad thing in the workplace too, right? When we bringing it back to TPS talk a little bit, like we have to be careful about making assumptions in the workplace. What throw it to you, what are your thoughts or reactions to that idea?
Most of my stories around that are too embarrassing to tell, so I'll let Sammy take that.
But talking about this episode of Jaywalking, if it was in Toyota City, most people work for Toyota, and that reminds me of one of my friends. He got into a car accident, and he was another intercompany transferee from Toyota Brazil, and he was a Japanese descent. And right after his accident, the OPED, Overseas Production Engineering Division head, called us, and he was responsible for all the ICTs, as they call them. And he had to go to the whiteboard, explain, I was this A car, there was a B car and a C car, and he drew the diagram and explained exactly what got him into this accident. Then the following morning, they had this already printed on these yellow sheets. We had to wear those safety number 1 ribbons and distribute that pamphlet to everybody coming in at 8:00.
Oh.
It's the, sometimes people think it's humiliating, but it's the way Toyota uses to make sure people understand that this is the way it happens. What is the way you can find so it doesn't happen again? What's the cause of it? Mm-hmm. But that's the reason why many times when you go to work, you see a lot of people with those yellow hats, the Anzen Daiichi, or safety first, distributing exactly what happened and the cause of it.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. It's a different level of safety awareness, I think.
Yeah. And when you work with different organizations, I'm sure you end up coaching people on problem solving. And it seems like assumptions can get us in trouble when we're trying to improve something. We assume we know what the cause was, or we assume that a solution, a countermeasure, is going to be successful. How do you have thoughts on coaching people through that?
Well, one of the foundations of that house of TPS or Toyota Way is the Genchi Genbutsu. So we place a lot of emphasis on how important it is for you to not interview people, not get reports, not hear, but go there and see and touch. And if you can really answer all the questions, usually, the 5 W's, 1 H, you know exactly what's happening, where, when, then you get credentials to start solving a problem, because the first step of solving a problem is understanding it really well. So we place a lot of focus on that, and then if it's too big and you don't understand it quite well, then you break it down to smaller, biteable size.
Yep, breaking down the problem is a good lesson.
Yes.
Darryl, I was trying to tee you up to say something not embarrassing.
Oh,
not embarrassing stories. I mean,
yeah, there's of course a lot of stories around, I think around that, and even internally in Toyota, I had the opportunity to be a part of the development and the pilot of the change in problem solving inside Toyota. We called it the Toyota Business Practice, or the TBP. And I got a chance to teach a lot of the executive sessions when we were rolling that out. And I was so shocked when some of the senior leaders, and my job was to kind of help guide them through the process. And when some of the senior leaders would show me their problem solving start and their A3, And even at that level, there was a lot of kind of a jumping to solution and then working backwards to make sure that their paper looked like their solution that they already had in mind. And really, pushing back on that is not easy sometimes to do, especially, if they're superior to you on the org chart. But I'm dealing with that right now with some other clients who are going through a deeper look at Hoshinkanri, and which is just a higher level of problem solving in a sense. We're trying to anticipate problems really. Yeah. And then as we break those down from high level to second level, third level in the organization, seeing kind of the solutions that they offer already without really understanding the problem. So it's so common. We don't even, I think in a lot of organizations, they don't even notice they do it. It's so common for them. It's just the air they breathe. And then you end up doing so many solutions that you're not sure which solution was for, probably don't even know root cause, so yeah, maybe it impacted something, but how did we get there? We don't know. Yeah. So yeah, it's a really tough one. I'm so thankful to have that Toyota experience, whether it really was, that was the air we breathed. We weren't allowed not to, at the end. It took a lot of coaching, and I provided some, and I got a lot more than I ever provided, believe me, about my assumptions internally. Yeah. But yeah, that's a big part, is really, keeping your mind open and not jumping to solution. That's probably the hardest thing to get out of the habit of sometimes.
Yeah, and breaking those habits. When I think back, this is going back to 1996 when I was working at General Motors. After about a year working there under a very traditional plant manager, who, like, accountability was too big of a word, right? It was just yell and scream and blame and cursing at people, and it was a really toxic environment. But then we got a new plant manager. Sammy had mentioned earlier the NUMMI plant, the joint venture between GM and Toyota. Our new plant manager was one of the original General Motors people. One of the books or articles that were being written about them referred to them as the NUMMI commandos. They were swooped in from General Motors, and so that plant manager, Larry Spiegel, had the benefit of having spent at least 15 years in the GM, the traditional GM, then getting that new experience at Toyota or NUMMI, and then coming back to other GM plants to try to help change them, right? So, he had been successful in another plant, and then he came into ours, and, he was now leading an organization that was full of middle-level managers and frontline supervisors that were steeped in that toxic air for 30, 35 years, all of them. And then, Larry is coming in with a different perspective and trying to change that. And, it was a huge challenge. And the plant made great progress in a couple of years. And I had a chance at one point sort of reconnect with Larry after I'd been gone. And I think he was retired and teaching at University of Michigan, and ask him about what was it like coming back in and trying to have these, I may have used the word knuckleheads, or, these people that were not operating the way you would have wanted them to, and how did you deal with that? And he said something to the effect of, like, well, I had to remind myself and to be patient that they didn't have the good fortune to have the experience that I had. And I thought that was pretty powerful, right? That he had that Toyota experience, and it did transform him. But then, it was tough now that he was at one point he was a fish out of water, and now he was back in the GM water. I'm mixing my analogies, but but anyway, when you talk about, Darryl, when you were saying, the good fortune that you had, and Sammy, it seems like you agree, to have been exposed to that. I think Larry, even though he only had, a couple of years of that before being thrown back into the GM pond, I know he really appreciated that as well.
Yeah, it's a good mix of courage and humility, as we talked about before.
Well, and going back to the book, Toyota by Toyota, I mean, go back to the first chapter of talking about leading with humility, but also courage and challenge, if I remember right, like that all fitting together, right?
Yeah. Courage, humility, and Kaizen kind of is the heart of that.
Yeah. And, that word challenge comes up like in the Toyota Way documents. And, I think, I learned from Larry and others along the way, respect for people doesn't mean
the good book.
There you go. Yeah. That respect for people doesn't mean being soft on people. That any good coach challenges you to perform up to the level you're capable of, which is maybe part of that system that they're hopefully creating.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And it's when we talk about that, the model that we use in Honsha, the continuous improvement and respect, with the heart being the courage, humility, and Kaizen. So that it's a very, when we do that coaching, and we challenge people. And a lot of times I talk about, it's not about just being polite and nice to people. That's easy to do for the most part. But it's and when we talk about Kaizen, we really focus on not just the change for better and that kind of thing. That's important part, and it's really easy to market it. But the harder part of that is this kind of a sacrifice, really, of sacrificing your old ways, sacrificing your effort and your time. And as a leader, every time I coach someone, I am sacrificing part of my time, effort, and energy. And so when I do that, I must be respectful by leveraging that time to make them help them get closer to their potential. Yeah. And that should be my main focus. And of course, doing it in a way that is attractive to people, not pushing them away. You don't want to, push people away. But the main part of that is really, I'm going to show respect by giving feedback. So for me personally in Toyota, and I try to emulate this when I'm teaching and coaching, if I get a document back in Toyota and it had nothing on it, it said, "Oh, good job." Well, there's two possibilities. One is I'm perfect. Well, those of you who know me know that's not true. The other is they just didn't care enough to give any thought to it. Yeah. And so when you get your document back and it's got extensive questions and then you get suggestions, you truly know that you're being respected. That's the sign of respect. Yeah. Now I have to admit, I wish there had been some times when I had a little less respect because so many iterations, to make it better. Yeah. But I think that's part of, you were telling the story of the leader who said, they have to have the perspective of they haven't had the experience I had. And we also have to have the experience, on the other side of that, if we're being coached and developed, if we can have the mindset that this truly is respect when I get this feedback. And if it's done in that spirit, then it really creates a great atmosphere for people to challenge and learn and continuously improve. Yeah, it means I care about you and I want you to do the best you can. Yeah, I think so. And these are, so Lean Whiskey is, part of the podcast here is, these are the types of conversations that we'll have over a whiskey and a hotel bar in Japan, right? Which we had a few of those. So. We have, yes. Except thankfully the room I'm in right now is not smoky. It doesn't have quite the charm and the character of the hotel bar in Nagoya, but so be it. It is true. So maybe one last thing we can cover here. I'm curious, how has life and work changed, for each of you during the pandemic here as consultants, or anything else you want to share reflections on what we're all going through this year?
I can start. Well, in my case, it changed quite a bit. I traveled almost as much as Darryl. So not being able to travel, for me, it's been a blessing. I've been eating so well. I didn't know that Mickey could cook so well. It's great food, I'll tell you. And you also cook a lot as well, so you share that burden. Yeah. but and she spends most of the time sewing for those face masks. I spend most of my time here in the office doing just doing internal work for Honsha and trying to work with Brazil. Brazil has a lot of new members just recently, just retired from Toyota. So it's a lot of those internal development nowadays, and I just love it. I couldn't ask for anything better.
Making the best of it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're really lucky. I mentioned earlier we have 3 anchor clients, kind of our main clients, and several others that are kind of a little bit more less intensive than those. But these are multiple people, pretty much full time. 2 of them maintained throughout, and they got even more demand because of the industries that they're in. And one of them paused. They were auto supplier. They paused, and they have started back up again. So we've been really lucky in that aspect of being able to continue working remotely and supporting remotely. We have some people that were kind of in residence at one of the clients, so they moved to the city, they live there, so they would be like a team member. They would go in from time to time. So really lucky in that aspect. I think I traveled 2019 204 days. Of course, March 7th, I came home from a trip and haven't been back since. So, but as Sammy said, we've been working a lot on internal things. One thing that has really, I think it's been better. I'll say that. Like I said earlier, I worked with some companies over the years in Hoshin Connery development. And most of those companies are part of a private equity group that some friends of mine have been with for 13 years or so. And when we were doing it face to face, we would generally have to do a lot in a short amount of time, and then move on to the next company or something like that. And this year, for the first time, we've been able to actually have real discussions and real catchball and real taking it through the organization, at least at this point, down at least a couple of levels. And I don't think that would have been possible in the pre-COVID times. We're more used to technology like Zoom. We've been using Miro as a interaction collaboration platform, and it's ideally suited for things like Hoshin and being able to do those kind of collaborative things and problem solving. And so I hate to say, but like Sammy said, there's a lot of things that are better.
Yeah.
And I think what we all are going to be thinking differently about work in the future, regardless of what happens, and what it means to be effective, what it means to be productive, challenging maybe excessive travel, for example. Do we really need? What is the big benefit? And I don't think we're social beings, so we're going to want to be together.
Yeah.
But how do we take advantage of some of the things we're learning about work? And also, we should never, as the 3 of us, never forget, how privileged we are to be able to even have that opportunity. Whereas so many folks in the world, they don't, and this is an overwhelming burden for them. Right. And some people will never recover. So we have to keep that part of our humility and humanity as well. Sammy and I, we have an organization called Lean for Hope, where we work with not-for-profit organizations around the world who struggle to utilize their precious limited resources. And Lean is a great way to help organizations, even not-for-profits, really use their precious limited resources well. And so that's going to be a big part of our focus going forward, is how do we help people recover from this, and not not lose sight of just how lucky we are. So we can't forget that.
Very well said. Very beautifully said. So thank you for all of that, Darryl. So, I think we'll wrap up. It's been really great catching up with the both of you and having this conversation. So again, today we've been joined with Sammy Obara and Darryl Wilburn from Honsha. Their website is honsha.org if you want to learn more about them and their work. And, one thing that had been on the list today that we didn't really get to, Sammy had shared an interesting article on LinkedIn. So you can go check out Sammy's profile on LinkedIn, and there's different ways of sharing articles and thoughts and everything there. So thank you for that. So with that, Darryl, I'm jealous of your old fashioned. I'm also impressed with your discipline that you still have some in the glass.
Yeah, well, it won't last long.
So go ahead. Don't let that ice cube melt too much.
Well, that's a good thing about an old fashioned. It's always a little different, even as you go through it. So I'll enjoy all the phases of the old fashioned.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess we'll say cheers and kampai.
Kampai. Thanks for the opportunity, Mark. It's good to see you again.
Thanks for being here.
It was good seeing you guys. Talk soon.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.